This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hello again, everybody. It's another episode of your favorite manga podcast. We hope My Taste is Better Than Yours. Coming to you again from lovely Kyoto, Japan. It's Guardian Enzo. And joining me as ever from the other island nation across the sea, it's from Great Britain. And the United Kingdom. And yes, there is a difference. It's Samu. How you doing, Samu?
I'm good, and yes, there is a difference. What about the third island? What's the third island in this equation, Enzo?
Well, let's see. So
This
there's
is for you to say Greed
Ireland.
Island.
Oh, Greed Island. Ha ha. Yes, Japan, Great Britain, and Greed Island. Yes, those are the three. Those are the three islands in question. The three island nations. Very nice. If only I'd known in advance, I could have prepared. Uh yes, it's another Hunter x Hunter episode, and I will say, spoiler. Our Hunter x Hunter episodes have tended to be among the most popular that we do. People really like the Hunter x Hunter episodes, which I don't think is surprising when you have a manga that goes on hiatus for 3 years and then releases a volume and it sells 1 million copies. I think it's pretty clear that this is a series that still has a massive fan base. And as you know, because Hunter x Hunter is such a gigantic beast of a series, it's really impossible for us to cover it in one chunk, so in one swell foop. So we break it up into arcs, and this time around, it's the Greed Island arc, one I'm quite a fan of. I think probably fair to say in most fan polls, not a high-ranking arc in the Hunter x Hunter fan base lexicon, but then again, that's a relative term. I think most Hunter x Hunter fans love all the arcs. It's only a question of which one do you love the most. It ran from 2001 to 2003. If I'm not mistaken, Samu, because I wasn't reading the manga at the time, this one kind of got through without any major hiatuses, didn't it?
If there was any, they were kind of intermittent and nothing to the level of Chimera Ant or beyond.
Yeah, Chimera Ant that was brutal torture for the readership. Absolutely.
It was.
But yeah, so I'm ready for a good discussion here. Poured myself a little dram of something from Samu's homeland of Scotland, from
Oh, you're welcome.
the lovely town of Pitlochry, as a matter of fact. Maybe
I'm
those of you
familiar
out
with
there.
that. I do know the town.
Oh, you know Pitlochry, a beautiful little highland town. 2 distilleries there: Blair Atoll and Edrodour. This is an Edrodour I'm sipping on this evening. The first Scotch distillery I ever visited was Edrodour in Pitlochry,
Oh, wow.
it's a beautiful little town, isn't it? It really is. It's just it's a bit touristy, admittedly, but it's easy access from Edinburgh or Glasgow on the train, and if you want to see the Highlands without really busting your ass to get somewhere, it's a good jumping off point for that. But anyway, that's a distraction. So again, it's the other island we're talking about, Greed Island. And of course, Greed Island is very familiar to fans of Hunter x Hunter. And of course, it appeared in the manga. It had it's the I think there was the part of the original TV series and then OVA as well.
Yeah.
And then 2011 series. I've even heard suggestions. Some people suggest that they should make a theatrical film of the Greed Island arc now because they don't feel that it was properly treated by any of the anime versions. I don't think we need to get too deep into that. But it's an interesting, and of course, not surprisingly, as Hunter x Hunter has a big presence in the gaming world as well. Greed Island is very well represented in the gaming iterations of the series as well, for very obvious reasons. So let me ask you, Samu, someone who was a reader of the manga and has been through this Greed Island experience before, how have your perceptions of Greed Island changed over the years? And what's your favorite iteration of it, as far as anime, manga, OVA, game? What do you think is the best iteration of the arc?
Well, this is my fourth time experience the arc now. I do reread all of the arcs just before we cover them. It's nice to just be back in the world and experience it while we're talking about it. I have read Greed Island 3 times now and watched the 2011 anime. I haven't watched the original OVA version, but I am kind of tempted to go into it to compare it. It's a funny arc because my ranking versus the other arcs that come before it, it's changed every single time I've read it or experienced it. When I first read it, it was somewhere in the middle. Then I watched the 2011 anime, and I think I'm kind of of the belief that the anime version is weaker than the manga, so it kind of went down in my expectations. And then last decade, I then reread the series through again. It became my favorite pre-Chimera Ant arc, um, story arc in the series, and then now doing it again. Maybe I'm just too familiar with it at this point, but it kind of has gone. It's kind of shifted down in my view. So it's an arc with ever-changing feelings I've had about it, but it is like maybe the most self-contained as well. Every arc feels like a journey, especially from this point onward. Every arc feels like a journey that could be a side quest that then wraps back into the next one and continues weaving through. So I'm sure at the time maybe Greed Island felt strange to readers, even though it did have the outcome, the at least the initial promised outcome of Gon meeting his father. But it's a funny arc. It's a funny arc, and I think right now I land back where I was originally, whereas it's somewhere in the middle for me.
I'm somewhere in the middle too, but I'm curious, why do you think the anime version was weaker specifically? If you have a couple of reasons you could share.
I think I don't know. I don't know if it necessarily does any missteps or is a poor adaptation narratively. For me, I think I found the some people had complaints about the initial Hunter exam arc and let's say the color scheme or visual presentation of it. I think Greed Island goes back to that aesthetic most in this arc. And just on a visual level, I found it less engaging. So it is purely on an aesthetic, translating from a black and white page to a hyper colorful realization of this like MMO world. It
Hmm.
makes sense. It is accurate to what is being depicted, but I almost found it more palatable to the eye in black and white.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think the color schemes of the arc represent the emotional palette that Togashi is using. So I think that's why the brightest arcs, color wise, in the anime are Hunter Exam, Heaven's Arena, and Greed Island, because
Yeah.
those are the Gon Killua arcs. Those are the boyish, exuberant,
Mm.
violent, and dark, but also very, if you will. I know this is a pet peeve, but very shonen-y arcs. And Greed Island is as about as shonen as it gets. I think you would agree with me on that. It's really shonen, in a good
Yeah.
way. But it's like the power system and training arc and all that rolled into one.
It
All
checks
right,
all the
let's talk.
boxes.
It does. It definitely does. And so you asked the question of me: is this an isekai?
Mm.
Um, is Inuyasha technically an isekai? Probably yes. So if Inuyasha is, then Great Island probably is. But I think isekai is kind of like a perversion of the idea. And I think if you want to draw a loose enough definition of it, sure, I think you can call Great Island an isekai. But um, I don't think it is from a spiritual standpoint, if you will. I think it very much fits in the context of the story. No one in Great Island really loses their sense of who they are in the real world. The only people who do are the NPCs, basically. Um, so it reminds me almost like a little bit of something like the Hack series. You remember the Hack series? Uh, that
I've
takes you back.
Yeah, I've not watched it, but I'm familiar with it. I think
Yeah.
you could classify it as an isekai if you wanted to. At that point, you could go to so many levels. It's Soul Society, Arc and Bleach, and isekai. Probably it's a different world that we're all going to. But then, Greed Island, you get the revelation that it's not really an entirely different place. It's just another island on the real world as well.
Right. Right.
It's very much. I think in the same way Hack does. It channels early noughties an early 2000s MMO video game, like Japanese video game vibe. I think that is the aesthetic as well.
Yeah, and all right, let's talk about some specifics of the arc and some of the things that I think very fun about it. First of all, Hisoka's role in this arc. It was really Hisoka's arrival on the scene in Hunter Exam that was like my first experience when I was first experiencing the series. Is like, okay, this is something different than I thought it was. Um, and he sort of he's always changing, but he maintains a certain place in the story. He has kind of almost a Greek chorus role in a way. He I think feel like almost he's an author voice sometimes. But he's also this incredibly creepy and funny and relentlessly insane, but rational. Just and just a pure phenomenon. This guy. So the kind of infamous moments he has in this arc are where Gon and Killua first meet him inside the game. Now he's inside the game looking for a way to cure Crollo, or looking for the person who can cure Crollo because he wants to fight the real deal and kill him, but it's no fun for him to kill Crollo if Crollo has his Nen gone, which of course he does because of Kurapika. So it's kind of elegant the way he ties all that together. But for the purposes of the game, which I think is just a beautifully Togashi thing. It's like we need somebody strong in order to accomplish our goal here, which is Gon and Killua basically are inside Greed Island. The story here is because Gon is searching for his father, and Ging has left Gon a trail of breadcrumbs, only accessible once he achieved the level of understanding Nen, that lead him inside the game. So Gon is here looking for his daddy. They kind of have an idea of what they need to do in order to accomplish that, and they need strong allies in order to do it, to jump through the hoops that Greed Island has set up for him. And let's face it, they don't get much stronger than Hisoka. So once they realize that Hisoka is in there, it's sort of a natural thing when they meet him to ask him to help, because Hisoka is not inherently their enemy. They have nothing. They have no contrary goals at this point. Hisoka is in the game for one reason, and they're in the game for another reason. But as long as he's there, as I've said many times, I think the greatest enemy in Hisoka's life is boredom. So hanging out with Gon and kicking some butts, I think for him, hey, why not? I'm just hanging out anyway. I haven't found the person I'm looking for. So I just think it's great that it's kind of such a casual thing, that these technically sort of enemies, they become allies. But when they first meet him, he's bathing in a pond, and of course, infamously, when he stands up and he sees who it is, he's proudly at attention. And there's another scene shortly after that where Gon and Killua are walking ahead of Hisoka, and they feel his energy, shall we say, coming from behind them, and Killua insists that Hisoka walk in front. So I want to ask you, what do you make of this representation of Hisoka that Togashi gives us in those two scenes, which happen basically more or less interconnected with each other? What's he going for there? Is that strictly for comedy, or is he telling us something else?
My view is, I think that is Togashi doing something which he thinks is funny. I think he almost like revels in knowing the shock factor of what he's delivering with Hisoka. The thing with Hisoka as well, I mean, you meant he's such a fun character. There is no situation where if he drew him in, that it wouldn't be more entertaining as a result of him just being there.
Yes.
And considering the depictions we saw of him with Gon before now, and also these two scenes back to back, it just every time I revisit those moments, I'm like, God, it's so impressive that Togashi's made a character and is so blatant about this side of him, this twisted, awful side of him that we can all agree is gross, but we still love him as a character. Like, that is so impressive that he's able to do that, because you would just think on paper that this is, it would be impossible to root for and enjoy and like a character who does things like this. But I think
Yeah.
maybe there is also a level of, I mean, within the context of the story, Togashi through Hisoka will frame it as it's to do with power level, it's to do with
Hmm.
Hisoka's piqued interest. It comes through in a sexual way, but the internal justification for Hisoka's character would be that it's not purely on that level. Interestingly, I don't know if you. I'm not going to touch on it in detail, but I don't know if you're up to date with the latest chapters that are being published right now. Did you read the chapter? I think it's 405, which is it was a big Hisoka chapter, and if anything, that was the first chapter in the series I feel where we get an internal monologue and understanding of Hisoka's character more than we ever have been allowed to before, which I think is interesting when you consider against these scenes like that, and how he views himself.
Hmm.
To us, the viewer watcher, are they funny? I don't know. They're just weird. They're weird. I don't know. It's the one point of Togashi where I'm like, fine. If this is what I've got to sit through to get the greatness, then I will.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I feel with Made in Abyss a lot of the time. That there are moments with
Oh yeah,
Tsukushi where I say, "All right, if I have to sit through this to get to all the great stuff, I mean, I'll do it." I think it's even worse there,
yes.
but I do think that there are moments of that with Togashi. But
At,
he
at least
I think
at least with Hisoka and Gon, the dynamic itself, you can take that out. The dynamic is still excellent between those
sure,
two characters.
absolutely, absolutely, and this is one of my favorite pet sayings about Togashi is that he tries stuff and pulls off that no other mangaka would even try. And I think this is a case
Or in
where
this case,
Hisoka is
should try.
or should try it. No, absolutely, they're right not to try it because if they tried it, they would fall flat on their face. But he can pull it off, and you can't. He has this incredible ability to do shit that nobody else could do, to go places that no one should ever go, and make it worthwhile. And as far as Hisoka specifically, is there a prurience when his view of him of Gon and Killua, especially Gon? I think it comes down to. I do think it comes down to quite legitimately that what turns him on is power. It's threat, it's thrill, it's this idea of um, just this idea of facing someone who's powerful and danger. And I think in Gon he sees all these things, and with Hisoka there's no difference between that kind of thrill and what we would more conventionally call an erotic thrill, a sexual thrill. I think for him, that is sexual, that is erotic.
Hmm.
And the fact that Gon is a young child is irrelevant. It's the power that he sees in Gon and the potential that he sees in Gon that turns him on. And the fact that Gon is a kid is irrelevant to that. So I think it's one of those things that makes Hisoka even more interesting, even though it's icky. I still think it makes him more interesting as a character, as
Yeah.
if he could get more interesting. Go ahead.
In this arc, we get to see him have fun and
Mm-hmm.
just like go along with the story, and because he's so invested in seeing Gon and now Kilo as well to some degree as well,
Mm.
have them grow, to have
Mm.
him be like, fine, I'll play along, I'll do it. That part in this particular arc is really fun to read.
Right. Yeah, and of course it builds to the great scene, the dodgeball scene with the three of them, which is like one of the just most preposterously incredibly great scenes in all of manga to me. It's so ridiculous, it's so absurd, and yet it totally works. And it's like the level of trust that they need to put in him in order to pull this off. Well, we'll get there in a minute, but I want to. So let's flip then to the total yang to that yin and talk about Biscuit, a character
Mm,
who is widely interpreted to be based on Togashi's wife, which, I think at this point widely interpreted to the point where it's pretty much an accepted fact that it's Takeuchi Naoko, who of course is the mangaka of Sailor Moon. And I think Bisky is first of all, I love Biscuit. I think Biscuit is a great character. I just absolutely
Yeah.
think she's fantastic.
I don't
But
think you can find someone who doesn't like Biscuit. I feel.
yeah, I mean, including Togashi for sure. I think that's absolutely true. Um, so here's the thing. I think she has a great dynamic with Killua, particularly where he continuously does his old hag jokes, and she just like unloads on him. And you think that joke would get tiring, and it just never gets tiring. It just never stops being funny. Killua being the little brat, and then her just unloading on him. But it's with Gon too. So here's my question for you about Bisky. We see this definite, like, she's a harsh master, and she teaches them a lot. I mean, Wing is the person who takes them under his wing, or initially, obviously, and then she really elevates that to the next level just for their survival. They kind of come into the game thinking, okay, we're the shit. We know Nen. We got it covered. Um, Even Killua, to an extent, who knows better than to let himself think that, you can tell he's sort of gotten into that mode. And she is there to let them know, no, little boys, you do not know nearly as much as you think you know. But what do you think is the emotional, like the relationship between Biscuit and the two of them uh, by the end of the arc? Do you think there's like a genuine, almost a sort of a maternal kind of a relationship there? Do you think there's a lot of general affection, or do you think it's just kind of more of a tolerance level? How do you see the relationship?
No, there's definitely a genuine bond between them, which is really sweet to see, especially comparing the initial interactions that they have. Basically, maybe seeing them more as just an opportunity for a means to an end.
Mm,
Um, how that evolves and carries throughout the rest of the series as well, and then transposes sort of onto Kurapika in the latest arc, even though she has no interaction with him here. Sort of like a friend of a friend situation, and I love Biscuit. I love the interaction she has with pretty much every character
mm,
she has a scene with. I think and also the fact that she reveals herself to be the teacher of Wing, so it's their
mm.
teacher's teacher, and how this
Right.
arc also kind of does mirror Heaven's Arena as well is an interesting point.
It does, and that's another thing I want to talk about. But Bisky actually does come to Gon's aid too, in election, when he's in a bad way. She's one of the people who comes when I guess it's Leorio. I'm just trying to remember details now, but like Leorio puts out an APB for people to come and help. She's one of the first ones to arrive, which sort of leads to her becoming involved in the Dark Continent arc too, in its way, and it's all sort of builds into that. But yeah, she's a funny one. The thing I think that's interesting about Greed Island is most of the people who are in there to have a good time. They're in there to enjoy themselves in one way or another, even though it is deadly serious because it's a hunter's game. But most of them, like Hisoka, but Hisoka's in there for a reason, very specific reason. Gon and Killua are in there for a very specific reason too. But once they get into the game, they're totally into that experience too. And Bisky, when she meets them, she sees them, as you said, it's like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to have some fun. And then, but over the course of the time, I think she really does develop a very affectionate relationship with them. I think she really feels very protective towards them by the end of it. Um, but let's talk about Greed Island versus Heaven's Arena, because in many ways I think they are almost like a sandwich. They're the slices of bread with York New City in the middle. They're two similar arcs in a way. Definitely both tournament arcs, I think it's fair to say, with some specific. But I think when you break them down, they're tournament arcs, they're training arcs. Um, which do you think is the ultimate Hunter x Hunter tournament arc? Is it Greed Island or is it Hunter's Arena? How do you think those two arcs are similar, and how do you think they're different?
See, that was the answer would change depending on which iteration, how many times I'd
Mm,
experienced this arc. At the moment, I would say us talking about and me rereading Heaven's Arena gave me more appreciation for it than I gained this time with Greed Island. So I would actually say maybe for the first time in my history with Hunter x Hunter, probably Heaven's Arena, at
Hmm.
least as a tournament arc. I think Greed Island, when it comes to the training aspect, though, I feel Togashi's good at all of the training parts. He has it in Heaven's Arena, Greed Island, and then we have a good chunk of it in the early portions of Chimera Ant as well. I think it gets better each time he
Hmm.
goes in full shonen training mode for Gon and Killua. Um,
Hmm.
so I think Greed Island ekes it out in that way. And then, yeah, overall, I'll see with my final score at the end. But in the
Okay.
differences of their arcs, I feel there's more ambition here in what he's trying to do. And even though we always say Togashi is a genius, which he is, this is my first time where I would say maybe there is some ways in which it doesn't live up to all the things he establishes early on, personally.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And boy, it's a tough one for me. I haven't reread it and rewatched it as many times as you have, but I tend
Because you
probably
love
to
Heaven's
favor.
Arena as well.
I do. I tend to favor that one just slightly, but it's very, very close. It's very, very close. I do think Greed Island. It's a sort of a natural evolution of Heaven's Arena in a way. That they're playing at a higher level here. Let's put it that way. I think one of the things you love to talk about with Hunter x Hunter is the anticlimax factor, and I think the bomber is a part of that. I think the bomber is, to a certain extent, almost incidental to this arc. He's important in that, from a plot standpoint, from a practical standpoint, he does represent theoretically the villain of the piece. He's the obstacle, but I never feel like the bomber is he's not the Chimera Ant King. He's not Meruem. He's not Corollo or
Or
Hisoka.
Hisoka,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, he's a supporting character. He's a big bad, but he's not a titan in the same way some of the figures in this series are. And I think that ties into your beloved anticlimax factor. But I also don't think he's ever really intended to be there. I mean, I think he's a test for Gon and Killua, much like everything in this arc is a test for Gon and Killua. And while maybe Ging didn't specifically intend for the bomber to be the test, I think ultimately that's what he is. He's the final test that they have to pass to
Hmm.
get on to the next level for Gon to be worthy in his esteemed view of meeting him. And even then, having done that, Gon has to pass one more test. Are you an asshole? In order to be worthy of beating him. And when Gon decides, no, I'm not an asshole, then Ging's rule is, oh, well, and I guess you can't meet me then. You'll have to make do with Kite. But so leads me to another question. Is Ging a bad dad or is he a terrible dad? What do you think?
Of the two options, I'm actually going to lean towards bad, but
Okay.
I mean, obviously he gets explored later on, but that's another element. It's such a shonen trope, the absent dad that Togashi's taking to this next level. And I can only imagine if you're thinking about if this was the latest chapter that was being out, the blue balls you would have felt in that final. Yes, the bomber is an anticlimax as a villain. I feel I would argue in an unsatisfying way, but I feel like the other big anticlimax for the conclusion of the arc is that decision he has to make and the closeness Gon gets to his meeting Ging, and for the reader to meet Ging, and that we don't,
Mm,
and then we get
mm,
sent somewhere completely different,
mm.
and we don't get that satisfaction at the end. I can imagine maybe that was a little bit annoying at the time it came out. Yeah, Ging, fascinating character. We're definitely going to get
Oh,
into him
yeah.
more in later arcs, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
Going
yeah.
back, going back to the bomber though, I think he is probably one of the major problems I have with the arc when I was rereading it recently, because I love the concept of Greed Island. I love that this journey that Gon and Killua are being set up for, and the rules. Togashi's so good at making rules that
He
then
does. Yeah.
work within the context of the story, and he doesn't break the rules. He uses them in a smart way, and this is in some ways I see all we mirror Heaven's Arena with Greed Island. In some ways I mirror Greed Island with the Succession Contest arc as well, because this feels like the first arc where Togashi went all out on excessive detail. In this case, I would say with the establishment of all the cards, the powers, the ways in which the characters can use that to play the game, even if within the context of the story, we're not super privy to every single card until it's relevant within the context of plot development. But the fact that he sat and wrote all these hundreds of rules to in different ways he can move the story, I think mirrors what he's doing more successfully in the current arc, where
Mm.
he's basically going full Togashi. He's doing as much as he can, cramming in as much as he can, putting every idea in, but he's weaving it within characters that each have a place in the role, or each have a role in their story. It's all coming together on the boat. Whereas here, he was, I feel like, dipping his toe and getting a feel for what would happen if I just wrote out the rules to 100 cards and then he did it. I don't know how much time he spent on it, but it's, yeah, that's, I love that he did that. The bomber himself feels like a anticlimax in a way that just feels unsatisfying, because comparing him against all the other villains of the series, we don't really know him. We don't get a sense of him beyond um, just his antagonistic force that he has against other characters. I don't find him particularly interesting on a visual level or as character. And I only say that because I feel like in the latter half of the arc, we get a lot of focus on him, but we never delve deep. So it's not, even though he is supporting, like you say, we still are treating him like the big bad that we need to get over. And the fact that he just doesn't square up to the other big bads in the series, I think makes Greed Island stand out to me in that way, which is a little disappointing.
Okay, I think that's fair. Again, though, I think to a certain extent it's intentional. In terms of the situation being an anticlimax with Gon not meeting his father at the end, I think that's one of the cases where I felt that way at the time and then realized later, oh, that was exactly the right decision as a
Oh,
writer.
it was the
But
correct
I don't
decision
think
for us as the reader,
yeah, I don't
100%.
think we didn't know that at the time. I actually love that about Gon, that he made that decision at the end. I think because I think that gets to his credit that he made a decision that was true to himself, even though he was denying himself the opportunity to achieve what he thought was his goal. And he realized that there were things that were more important to him than his goal. I think maybe the single most satisfying moment in the entire series to me might be when Leorio finally reveals his Nen and what he uses it for in the election arc. And I'm sure you know the scene I'm talking about.
Mm.
I don't think I've ever felt more the landing of a punch more satisfying than that. And that's really Leorio's hero moment. That's his finest moment in the series, I think, inarguably, because Lord knows I would have liked to do that, and I think millions of fans probably would too. But yeah, that's a moment for later. I do think,
100%.
however, that the dodgeball climax, culminating in the three-headed monster of Gon and Killua and Hisoka, just the context of it being Gon and Killua and Hisoka doing this in the first place, the three of them in particular, and then the way it happens, I just think I think that's a phenomenal moment. I don't think there's anything remotely anticlimactic about that. I think it's great in the manga. I think it's even better in the anime. I think that's the true climax of the arc for me. Is that dodgeball match and the way it ends. So for me, that's the true climax of the arc, and the bomber really doesn't have much to do with that at all. So
Yeah,
um,
the dodgeball, I think is fun and it's entertaining, and like you say, just the situation for the characters themselves. Yeah, I don't fault it too much. I think maybe just similar to Bomber, if I was comparing it to the resolutions of other arcs, because it is just so inherently silly and what's happening.
hmm.
Um,
But it's a
it does
game.
I get it. It makes sense completely within the context of what we're getting. Um, I just don't think it resonates strongly with me um, after the fact. I'm like, it's really fun in the moment, and then once that
Mm,
little game is solved, I'm like,
mm.
okay, now what? Let's keep going.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, for me, I guess those are probably my three favorite characters in the series, and then to have them in this unimaginable context, I just think it's so ballsy for Togashi to have done that. I think it's great.
It's almost like fan service in a completely strange way.
Well, it is, and that leads to my next question: is Greed Island too self indulgent on Togashi's part? It is pretty self indulgent. I think he's clearly enjoying this. He's doing a lot of shit that he wants to do. He's scratching a lot of itches. It ties back to the power system thing with the cards and everything else, which I think is phenomenal. Like old Amadeus quote of taking dictation from God. Like this whole thing was already written, and he's just dictating it. He's just writing it down. That's how incredibly detailed this is, and how it all fits together. It's really remarkable. Um, but do you think there is a little bit too much Togashi self-indulgence in Greed Island, and maybe that's the reason why, with a lot of fans, it doesn't rank as high as other arcs do?
I think there is, and I think it's the reasons I already mentioned about the Togashi-isms and um, him going all out with all these rules he's established, which is fun and he sets up great in a great way. But yeah, I think maybe that also it is self indulgent, and the arc just it takes left turns in ways that maybe I wouldn't find the most engaging, which is why I'm more critical of it. But also, I think it makes sense to say it's self indulgent because I would argue, in my comparison to the Succession contest, that's also one of the most self indulgent arcs of the series.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
in the
I
same
agree.
way that I think this is Togashi's first time doing it, um, I think it shows it does show that is this arc spoiler. It's not. I'm not giving it 100 out of 100. Um, I think he, I think he learned from it. Clearly, he had fun, like you say,
Mm,
but I think he learned for it. And even though you don't have the affection for the Succession contest in the way I do, I think you can also tell that the level of indulgency mixed with the ambition has
mm,
increased to another level, and what he's
mm.
capable of doing, what he's trying to do. Because
Yes.
yeah,
I have a thought on that though, which is that I feel personally, where again we're talking Great Island here, but
yeah,
I personally feel like the Succession contest is the first arc where the first time I've felt personally that Togashi is being overambitious, and there's a lot of reasons for that. That it's too complicated to get into here. It's not the venue for it. I do, however, that's the first arc where I've really felt maybe he's bitten off more than he should be chewing for a lot of reasons. And I don't find that arc to be as engaging as Greed Island, but that's again a topic for another
for that episode.
another day. Yeah, exactly.
I so
So
before we move on though,
go
I
ahead.
just want to say I have a lot of theories when we do get round to that episode about maybe why you feel that way, and
Mm,
clearly everyone doesn't love the arc that the ongoing arc as much. Um, I would not say it's the best arc. I think we're going to cover that shortly, but
yes, I agree.
would I say it's my favorite arc? I think I would. I think for me,
Wow.
what I love, I've never been more checked in, clued in.
Mm,
Like I'm every page, every panel, I'm there,
mm,
I'm with it, which is just because
yeah.
clearly there are people who aren't.
Yep. Including me.
And yeah, including you. And Greed Island, I think, was him. Greed Island is kind of similar vibe in that way of whether you're checked into the premise and the
I,
logic of it.
yeah. Interesting comparison. I hadn't thought about Greed Island and Succession Arc, but it does sort of make sense if you think about a big ship or an island. There is a sign of a there is a kind of these people are stuck here together and dealing with this power system and everything else. And yeah, I can definitely see that. Um, Now, all right. So before we go on to the tail end of the recommendations and the scoring and all that good stuff, one question I wanted to ask is, if you could take one Greed Island card with you off the island, which card would you take? Now, the winner, of course, gets 3 cards, but because there were 3 winners in this case, and those guys agreed, Biscuit, Killua, and Gon, they amicably decided to split all the cards 3 ways. They each only got to choose one. Now, Gon's choice was very specifically tied into the whole Ging question, but which I can go first if you want to make this a little easier because I was the one who suggested it. But which card would you take? And it's not an easy question by any stretch of the imagination. And I was inclined to say Archangel's Breath, because the idea that kind of you can heal anything, boy, that's pretty powerful. And from a purely practical standpoint, I think that would be a very logical choice. I also thought about Goldust Girl because I think it's so hilarious the relationship Killua has with that card. But in the end, I like Sleeping Girl. That's the one I picked because this idea, the Sleeping Girl fulfills your need for sleep, and you're free to do everything you want and never get tired as long as the card is in action because she's sleeping for you. And you get the benefit of as if you'd slept soundly for 12 hours and you get to be awake and doing your own thing. And you never have to give that half of your life away. And while I enjoy sleeping, I do think there's so much I want to experience in the world. It would be nice to be able to just go 24 hours and just experience all of that and not have to sleep. So
I
for
think you
me,
hate sleeping, Enzo. Just say you hate sleeping.
well, I am an insomniac, so I do have a love-hate relation. I have a love-hate relationship with sleeping. Let's put it that way. So my pick is Sleeping Girl, although I think Archangel's Breath is the logical pick. It's a head-heart situation for me. The head says Archangel's Breath, but the heart says Sleeping Girl. What's your choice?
Okay, so you did brief me on this beforehand because this does require some research, and I
Yes.
could have been on the Wikipedia for hours. I feel like,
Yeah, I've been there.
I can't imagine. I was going to say, why did Togashi do this? But I know why he did it. He got carried away,
He
and he was like,
loves it.
okay, it's great that this exists. Oh my god, there are so many, but I feel like the one I'm inclined to go for is A11, which is Sage's Aquamarine. Its owner will have many intelligent friends and keep those friendships for their entire lives. That seems like one that of
Wow.
something that would carry through as a security that would always be there. I feel like if you gave me another hour, I could probably take about 10 more that I would probably pick out. But yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah, that is an
question.
interesting. That is an interesting one. And as someone who loves making conversation and loves debate uh, you know, that's the sort of thing the one of the things I like about that card is who would ever think of a Greed Island scenario and the whole idea of it, and with the history that we have with Yu-Gi-Oh and all these other things and the whole background that goes into this, and who would ever think of that being a power card? I mean, seriously. I mean, that's really a very Togashi kind of an idea that this would be one of the most powerful cards. It's almost a romantic sense, I do think. Did that actually play a role in the story? That card, I don't remember that card actually playing a
Uh,
role in the story.
I don't think so. I think that was one of the many ones that just appears as a volume extra. Or
Yeah,
there was a couple. I can't remember what chapter it was, but there was that random chapter where I think like 6 or 8 pages are just every single card that you see.
yeah,
Um, I think that was just
yeah,
one of
yeah.
those
I
ones
do
that,
remember that.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a good choice actually, and you're making me jealous now because I wish I'd picked it. But there you go. Okay, it's recommendations time, and this time I'm going to let you go first. So please, Dozo, Samu, what is your recommendation for Greed Island fans?
I'm keeping it weekly Shounen Jump yet again with Hunter x Hunter, and this time I'm going to do World Trigger by
Oh,
Daisuke Ashihara. Which the reason why I'm bringing that one up is it is another battle manga, but there is a large chunk of the series which is a in-universe game simulation. It's called the B Rank Wars arc, and that also seems like an arc that is kind of like the side story that ends up progressing to the point where fans loved it so much, and clearly Daisuke Ashihara did, that it takes up majority of the entire series. This sidestep from the introduced plot, where the characters are just having this tournament amongst themselves. Hunter x Hunter is a series with that embraces the idea of the detour, and enjoying the journey along the way, and that is
Yeah,
definitely a
exactly.
detour within the series. And I think World Trigger is actually kind of slept on a little bit. I'm not up to speed with it in the manga at the moment, but I am going to catch up. The anime adaptation was not great, even though I really wanted it to be.
Interesting. I actually tried a couple times with World Trigger, once with the manga, once with the anime, and it never quite took. I would agree with you that the anime adaptation
It's
is
a bit stiff.
indifferent, I would say. I kind of put World Trigger and Black Clover kind of in the same category as like kind of mid, popular but not like mega popular, pretty good but not like really that great. Got anime adaptations that were not that spectacular. They kind of run together in my head for some reason. I think Black Clover is probably more popular on the whole than World Trigger. I think it's fair to say, although I don't know for sure.
Funnily enough, World Trigger, because it's moved from Weekly Shonen Jump to Jump Square some years
Yeah, it
ago,
has. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and if it was still running in Weekly Shonen Jump, it would be, now that Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia have ended, it would be the second best selling in the series. I believe, I'm thinking to last year in 2023, Volume 26 sold over 400,000 copies.
Wow,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
so it has an extremely dedicated fan base, which has not died down, and it switched to monthly. So, I say it's underappreciated, but that's maybe in the global context as opposed to in
Oh, that's
Japan.
interesting. All right, good pick then. My choice. I'm going to go into the Wayback Machine here for Brave Story, which was not a manga, but it was adapted into a manga by Miyabe. Miyabe Miyuki is the author of the novel and was also the writer on the manga, which was drawn by Ono Yoichiro. And Brave Story is sort of, as Greed Island is, kind of a proto isekai. It has an isekai vibe, but it's not like a modern isekai. It's like it's like a light novel in the way Boogie Pop or Shinsekai Yori are light novels. Let's put it that way. It's a very it's more of a novel than a light novel. This one is specifically a novel, but it is a sort of a proto isekai. It involves going into another world with an interesting power system, and in it's not a game, but it's per se, but it's like there's some interesting characters in there, and it has a really impressive world building, I would say. And there was a movie version of it. I don't think it ever got a series anime, but there was a movie adaptation of it that I thought was quite good. And the manga is quite good. I haven't read the novel, but the manga is very good. I think the manga is a pretty representative take on the story. As far as I know, the fans of the novel consider the manga to be quite good. And I think it does have a bit of a Greed Island vibe to it. It's more traditional fantasy and a more serious in tone, but it has some of the same qualities of imagination and world building and detail that Togashi brings to Greed Island. So my pick would be Brave Story. And then let's move on. Have you seen or read Brave Story by any chance?
No, I haven't, but the movie adaptation is on my watch list. So I'll bump that up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's well worth it. Okay, let's get to the final overview of and scoring here. I'm gonna go 92 on this one, which
Mm.
is a notch below York New and a notch below Heaven's Arena, which I like just a hair more. But still, I really like this arc a lot. I'm not one of the people who rides it. I'm not one of the people who takes it down. It's not perfect. It's not essentially the best Togashi that Togashi can be, but it's very good Togashi, and very good Togashi is still great. And that's reflected in the score for me, and just some of the highlights of the arc, many involving Hisoka, but just generally Biscuit being one of the best, arguably the best side character in the entire series. You could make the case, certainly in the top three. For me, it's a 92. How about you?
For me, it's an 88, which is the score I gave Hunter Exam as well. If I was to compare the two, I do still feel like Greed Island is a little bit has greater ambitions, as you say, introduces more important characters that I have great affection for. So I would put it above that. But yeah, it's lowered a little bit in my expectations, but that's fine. It's an arc in of itself that feels like a sidestep in intentional way, and I don't think it changes my overall feelings of the series at all.
All
And
right, fair enough.
88 is still a good score. I still think it's a
Yeah,
very,
it's still a
very
good
good
score.
arc.
Yeah, I agree. It's still a good score. It's slightly lower than I expected you to go, but I thought you might be around 91. So yeah,
Hmm.
okay. I think we're gonna. I think the next one we cover is going to be probably our highest score for the series, I would guess.
I'm really
Um,
curious by what your rating is going to be. I'm curious about
well, I'll give you, well, I won't give you any spoilers.
that.
It's going to be high. The only spoiler, it's going to be high. I told you, I have series we've covered on the show before, like Wandering Sun and Bun Bun, which are just outside my top 10. If Chimera Ant were a standalone arc, were a standalone series, it would be in my top 10. And I've done lists on before of like on LIA of my best shonen arcs of all time, and it's absolutely in my top 5 shonen arcs. And I didn't go numerically on those. I did in no particular order. But if I were to go in any particular order, I can tell you that Chimera Ant would be in my top 2, along with probably the Kyoto arc or Rurouni Kenshin. Those would probably be my top 2 shonen arcs of all time.
Well,
So
maybe
that's
next time I'll force you to pick an answer. Then that can be what we get. We'll see if we can get that out of
yeah,
your next podcast.
boy, that would be a tough one. But we're gonna. I almost, yeah. That's going to be an interesting conversation because there's a lot to talk about with that arc. But in any
Yeah,
event, that's for then. This is for now. So for now, then I will say thank you very much for tuning in as always. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. If you're checking out the post on the website, if you are watching the YouTube version of this, of course, it would be great for the channel if you could subscribe. And likes and comments are very much appreciated. And the latter are, I think I always reply to every comment on one of the videos. So I hope you'll leave a comment if you want to share your thoughts. And Samu, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
thank you as well, and thank you, Togashi. Keep powering through.
Yeah, it is great. We live in a world, there's a lot to be angry about and dismayed about in the world right now, but we do live in a world where Hunter x Hunter has new chapters, so at least we have that going for us. So thank you very much. As always, I encourage you. I've been prohibited from talking about the weather, but they can't stop me from saying, stay frosty. Thank you very much.